Scott Drew has built a national powerhouse at Baylor, obviously the 2021 national championship, but 2 seasons since Jerome Tang's left, it's been a 3 seed, and they've lost in the second round. Even though they've had a top 6 offense, they've been outside the top 70 in defense. So Baylor, with some injections of talent from the portal from the ACC and a 5-star freshman, will look to get a little bit further in the tournament this year. Christian, Nick, here with Kendall Kaut, who covers Baylor for Sikkim 365. Kendall, thank you for joining us. Tell us, do you think Baylor can take a step, even though they've obviously been, it's normal for them to be a 3 seed now, whatever, but like, can they get back to the top of the college basketball mountain this season?
I think they can. Christian, I wouldn't. They're probably not the preseason favorite. Some people like Kansas. I'd probably have Kansas a little lower than others, but I think they're very capable of being one of those probably 10 teams who circle preseason that could win a national championship. Obviously, the roster turns over almost completely beyond Jaden Nunn. Some new coaching pieces with John Jacobs getting the head gig at Florida Atlantic and Alvin Brooks to Kentucky. But the sport is about talent. It's about players. And if you look at the talent and players that Baylor has, they absolutely believe they should be there on the final weekend of the season, and they should at least be there on the second to last weekend of the season this year.
Key newcomer coming in, VJ Edgecombe. How good is he, and what can we expect out of him year one? You look at the last 2 seasons, the guards that Scott Drew's brought in, how good they've been. Jacoby Walter was a 13 Big 12 player, 19th draft pick overall. Keontae George, 17 Big 12, 16th draft pick overall. And I look at VJ, and I've seen some of his stuff. I think that he can be better than both of those guys. So what can we expect out of him in year one?
Yeah, Nick, I agree with you. VJ should be better than both of them. Fran Fraschilla is a really good friend of the program. He lives in Dallas. He's been close with Scott Drew since Fran got into calling basketball. He said the other day that he didn't want to overhype it, but that VJ Edgecombe gave him Dwayne Wade vibes. He played on the Bahamas national team this summer, and at times he was better than both Eric Gordon and Buddy Hield on a team that features a variety of NBA pros. You look at kind of the weaknesses of Keontae George and what also happened with Jacoby Walter last season. Keontae George had an ankle injury that really hampered him in February and March of that season. I was at all the Big 12 and NCAA tournament games. They had locker room access finally returned after the COVID issues that precluded that for the couple seasons. We had COVID restrictions and then masks and all that going on. And Keontae was limping around like a madman. So he never really got to his full potential at Baylor. So what he's done with the Jazz, he couldn't really display. And then in terms of Jacoby Walter, had some really good games at Baylor, particularly that starting game against Auburn. But VJ appears to be another tier athletically, and he is going to, I think, be a much better defender than Jacoby Walter could be, which, as Christian mentioned at the top, has really hampered Baylor the last couple of seasons. But, Nick, I do think he's going to be a lot better player than they got from either Keontae at Baylor or Jacoby was at Baylor or will be in the NBA.
So here's what's interesting to me about Baylor. Obviously, Scott Drew built a formula that he perfected around, 2020, the COVID year, and then the year after winning the national championship. Those two teams were just juggernauts. And since then, he has rocked with the same formula. It's a lot of ball screens. It's really good guards. It's rim running, energy bigs. They want to crash offensive glass and shoot a bunch of threes. But that defensive piece has been one thing that's missing. But to me, the second thing that's been missing is just the quality of those guards. Because when you go from Jared Butler, Teague, and Mitchell, that was just unreal. And then you follow up with, you got a Kinjo, you had Cryer, and Flagler, right? And then you talked about George and Walter were really good, but not like where they needed them to be. And then I guess I just feel like the and Ray J Dennis was good. Jaden Nunn was good last year, and I'm saying this because I hold Baylor to such a high standard now, right? This year I think they're getting closer to it. And the one other distinction is Mark Vital played the 4 on the championship team, and he wasn't a 3-point shooter. They had 3 shooters on the floor, right? And Norchad Omier is a guy who played exclusively the 5 at Miami. And my question is he going to slot in at the 4? Because I've seen projected starting lineups where he's at the 4, Ojuwan is at the 5, which puts the pressure on Edgecombe, Roach, and Nunn to it looks like he's kind of recreating the 2020 formula, if that makes sense, versus like having the stretch big like Jalen Bridges. Can you talk about how you see that fitting together if you see Norchad at the 4?
Sure. So that's a great lineup question. I think he will start the game at power forward and play the 4, as you mentioned there, Christian. But I think in a similar vein to how Baylor on those championship teams would play Flo Thamba for about 2.5 minutes, and then Jonathan Chamwa Chacho would come in and play center. And then even sometimes Mark Vital would slide over and play the 5 in a lineup I called the Fivel. Would have branded that probably and sold some T-shirts if not for Disney owning the trademark to Fivel for that mouse being an American hero. But when it comes to that lineup, I think Omir will close games at center. I think Josh O, as I like to dub him, will probably only end up playing about 10 to 15 minutes a night unless he can really improve as a shot blocker, and he hasn't displayed that his first 2 seasons. So I think he'll close to the 5. I think their guards give them potential. If Langston Love stays healthy this year, although that remains a question mark with his injuries, he could finish games at the 4. Or if not, I think that Jalen, the gentleman they brought, not Bridges, over from Cal, who's a good 3-point shooter, might be a little better in a lineup like that where he's asked to be the 4th offensive option or even the 5th one as opposed to where he was before. And with those offensive options, hopefully, Jaden Nunn can focus a little bit more defensively, and that will allow his defense to accelerate, which will also mean that even if, he's none of these guards are as good offensively as Davion Mitchell, Jared Butler, or Maceo Teague. That's an all-time backcourt along with probably Villanova 2018. You're probably not going to see a backcourt that good in any stretch in this era of college basketball and NIL ever again. But you don't have to be that good to win a national championship, right? You don't have to be 2021 Baylor or 2018 Villanova or 2008 Kansas to win a title. You just have to be a little bit better than you've been the last couple seasons to contend. And then eventually you hope the Houston's the world grind down like they do every season, it seems, or that Kansas has too many non-shooting players to take the court at once. And then you can find yourself there at the end of the season and be the team that hopefully beats the 9th Big Ten team to not win a national championship since 2000 on Championship Monday.
I like Norchad at the 4. Like I hate when guys are like, yeah, we're trying to develop his shot in the offseason and we want him to take more threes and this and that. But Norchad, before last season, his first 3 years of college, he was 6 for 21 from 3. Last season, he was 35% at 24 for 68. So he did kind of develop that. I mean, he was good for about 2 makes a game. So if they do go big with Ojo at the 5, I don't mind that really. As much as before we started this show, I was like, I don't know if that would work. I kind of come around to it. And I agree with you. I think that Josh O will play probably 10 to 15 minutes unless he can display rim protection. The other guard that I'm really curious about, I know what to expect from him, but man, is it weird. Like seeing Jeremy Roach in green instead of blue, like that is one of the craziest transfers, really the whole portal this past season. Can you kind of just talk about like how that went down, like his decision of leaving Duke, coming to Baylor, and like what to expect as him, being the general and leading Baylor this season?
Sure. So I think Jeremy Roach really wanted the opportunity to play point guard at Duke and to get some more shots with Cooper Flagg coming in and with who Duke has in the backcourt. That probably wasn't going to happen. Baylor, I think, recognizes they want experience at point guard. Ray J. Dennis was a great floor general, ran the offense well, wasn't quite as good on the defensive end as Baylor probably would have wanted him to be. You look at the Baylor success that they've had with senior or transfer guards going all the way back to Pierre Jackson, Monty LeConte, Lester Medford. That's a formula that Scott Drew has followed for a while. So I would expect Roach to really kind of dissect the offense. And that's probably a good space to be in since he wasn't a point guard primarily those last few seasons at Duke, playing primarily, as we all know, off the ball. That gives him a shot as he's the lead orchestrator to focus more on assisting guys, show he can make those passes. So I don't think he's necessarily going to hunt his shot quite as much as he had to at times at Duke. I think if you had a who's taking the final shot for Baylor, it probably is him to begin the season. But that doesn't mean he has to take 15 shots over a 30-minute stretch or 12 shots in one half. I don't think that's going to ever happen with Jeremy Roach. So I'd expect a big season from him in terms of assist numbers, and I think he'll try and make a leap defensively to show, hey, I can be a little bit of a 3-and-D backup point guard and kind of the Tyus Jones mold, to fit another Duke analogy, and that's probably his hope for getting and sticking in the NBA for a second.
Free Jeremy Roach, man. I went to Wake, so I'm anti-Duke, but I've always thought that he was kind of a little held back there. Like there were times where I'm like, this guy's really good, but he's just, whether it's just the guys around him or just the way, whether it's Coach K or Shire wanted him to play, like it just didn't seem like he was fully ever. It's crazy for a guy in 5th year to like break out, but I think he's a guy that's totally capable of that. Jaden Nunn I thought was fine last year. I didn't realize how good he was at shooting 3 ball. He shot 44% from deep. But Baylor generally is a team. Nick and I felt like we were super sharp for this. We realized that Baylor's 3-point percentage ranked super high, but man, did they load up on shooting like 65% from 3 against some bad teams at the beginning of the year, and they were not shooting very well from Big 12, or you expect them to be at the top of the conference. So I want to talk about Langston Love. I'm the self-proclaimed president of the Langston Love fan club. The second that he went down last year and wasn't getting back in, I was fading Baylor because I'm like, this team I just don't think has enough juice in the backcourt right now. When you're playing against teams like Iowa State, like I just didn't think they had enough. And Langston Love is a guy that start him, bring him off the bench. I don't care. He'll probably be the sixth man, but he is so good. Like, I just don't understand why people don't talk about him more. I'm fine with him being the sixth man, but are you on board with me thinking like Langston Love is like really, really good? And like, I think that speaks to how good this team is, that you have Roach, Nunn, Edgecombe, a lot of talent, a lot of 3-point shooting efficiency, creation, off the bounce. And then you bring Langston Love off the bench, which has been a staple of these Scott Drew teams. Is boom, here comes Adam Flagler. Boom, here comes Matthew Mayer. Just absolute firepower coming in off the bench. And that's what I like about Langston Love. Do you think he can be that again this year?
Yes, he's extremely valuable, and he's probably underrated by the analytics. Christian, obviously, we all like Ken Pom, Torvik, all the sites, and what we can glean from them and kind of find out. But at some level in big basketball games, you need somebody that can make 3 shots that the defense looks and says, we got them to take the shot we wanted, and they still made it. Right? He is very good at making the shots the defense wants to give him because he's good at kind of having a jab step. He can hit the 3, whether off the bounce or off the catch. He gets inside well. He's crafty with the right hand. Those things matter. And, as good as defense as Houston will play, as tough as it is to win at Allen Fieldhouse, he's a guy you feel comfortable with having the ball in his hand in isolation. And if Jeremy Roach gets going and if VJ Edgecombe's as athletic as we all think, if somebody decides, we're going to put our third best perimeter defender on Langston Love, that's where you could have a really big season. And if you get into a game where both teams aren't making shots, you'd much rather count on him to make shots down the stretch than some of the other players that Baylor could put in the lineup. So that really does come down to where is the health for him. Obviously, he's been out of out of high school, for quite a while now. We're going back to the Kendall Brown, Jeremy Sohan team is when he got onto campus. It feels like Jeremy Sohan's been a Spur now for decades. So you hope that this is the year he can stay healthy. When I talked to him in Kansas City at the end of the Big 12 tournament, he was optimistic he was going to play in the NCAA tournament. That didn't come to fruition. He's had some freaky injuries over his time. His eye got hammered, and then he wasn't able to play in the NCAA tournament back in Denver the previous season, and we all thought he might play there in the media. So been a weird stretch for Langston Love, but I do agree with you, Christian, that I still have high hopes for him. He's a kind of lottery ticket for this team. If Baylor ends up winning a national championship, it probably is necessary that Langston Love stays healthy. So that would be one piece. If you look at, if you were trying to bet on who might overachieve their expectations, he's probably the thing for Baylor that could make you say they can get a little bit higher versus if you're looking at like a Purdue of the world or maybe a team like Iowa State, you might just say, are they a guy short that can get them from being a, team number 7 if everything sort of goes right to being the team number 1?
Jalen Celestine, low-key pickup in my opinion, comes over from Cal, and I think they're gonna have to use him. And this leads to my next question as well is depth. Past the first 7, there's some question marks with freshmen and just youth. The landscape. Now we've done so many of these pods already. It's like some of these teams are just stacked 1 through 10. Now, obviously, Baylor starting 5 is as good as anyone in the country, but what can we expect from Celestine coming off the bench? And also, are there any other freshmen to look out for this season?
Yep. So I think when you look at what Jalen can do, I think he's going to play a lot. I think he's probably a 25-minute-a-game guy, which is a little bit surprising in terms of recruiting rankings. You come from Cal, where you're not dominant for a program that I know we love the Calgorithm for Cal football and the jokes they make on there, but really the basketball program hasn't been good since Konzo Martin was leading them to not very far runs in the NCAA tournament. So that probably leads to thinking, hey, maybe he's not going to have a great season, but I agree with your premise, Nick, that he's going to play quite a bit. So I would expect a big season from him. I think in terms of freshman play and what might happen otherwise, it's always a tough question because Baylor every year, when I talk to Scott Drew, I mentioned, is this the year you're going to play 9 or 10 guys again? Since that 2012 team where Corey Jefferson was a redshirt sophomore, Baylor has not really gone into the bench more than 7 or 8 guys. Even that championship team, there was sometimes some consternation that Matthew Meyer thought he deserved to play more minutes than he ended up getting, and that Jonathan Chachua maybe could have even gotten more minutes than he did. So I don't know that we'll see too many guys get more minutes, but could watch out for Baylor's backup point guard spot. Got an excellent freshman coming in that I can tell you that Alvin Gentry mentioned that if he were at a different school that wasn't going to have great point guard play in front of him like Jeremy Roach, that he might be an all Big 12 caliber player. So I'm not saying, that he's going to be like Taman Lipsey as a freshman with Jeremy Roach in front of him, but I do think that Baylor has some talent among that freshman class. I think Jason Asamoah, who comes in from Arizona, probably isn't going to get a lot of minutes on this team, but if he's willing to stick it through and get into year 2 and 3, can beef up. He has some of the body type of a Taurean Prince type player, and Taurean Prince was god awful as a freshman. Asamoah's way ahead of him there, but whether he'll be able to see it through at Baylor, I think will be a question mark for him. Obviously, Miro Little did not stay after Baylor brought in additional guards, but if he does, I think Asamoah also could be a good player for Baylor going into his sophomore season.
Do we call him Rob Wright? Robert O. Wright? I'm seeing this O pop up. What are you guys calling him?
Rob Wright, I don't know where the O is coming from, especially with Josh O. It would seem to me that we are out of O's to give out on this team. But if Rob Wright shocks the world, gets into the rotation, and Baylor goes to double point guard lineup, and an ode to Pierre Jackson and Lester Medford and Kenny Cherry, there'll be the possibility there.
Okay, so Celestine, I think to bring it back to what I started this call with, Celestine is not being, I feel like, expected to 1-for-1 be Jalen Bridges, but that's what's interesting is they have that look now, but they also have the Mark Vital look with Norchad. And then, like you said, if you want to close the Norchad the 5, he made the Final Four playing undersized 5-man game, right? So it's like the fact that you have that versatility where you can go with this like Norchad at the 4, crashing the offensive glass. He'll have a type of freedom defensively that he hasn't had in Miami because he's had to be, I always say he had to be on his best behavior 24/7 in Miami because if he got in foul trouble, like they were going to lose. And like, not that he should be fouling willy-nilly, but point is he doesn't need to be perfect defensively, guarding dudes way bigger than him night in, night out, possession in, possession out. And offensively, I want to see him just crash the offensive glass more. And he's got a bit of a face-up game and a post-up game as well. So I love Norchad, always been a fan of him. And then the fact that you have this look with Celestine where you can go him alongside Norchad, I think is a really fun look too. And Robert, I've definitely read some good things about him. I think the plan obviously is you got a lot of older guys here in this backcourt that he steps in and is a main guy next year. But to have that, the 28th overall recruit as a guy like a depth guard as your, whether you, I guess Edgecombe's a guard, right? But essentially your 5th guard, that's pretty cool. Let's talk about, we got a 6'10" dude from Croatia, Marino Dubrovic and Yanis Nadonga from JUCO. Are either of those guys we should have on our radar? Or as you said, is this looking like more of an 8-man rotation?
They seem like nice cats. I think something would have to go a little wrong with Baylor's roster. Otherwise, guys would, be academically ineligible for us to see them playing in any major games. And, major college basketball, they find a way to keep you eligible. So I would not expect to see them playing significant minutes in any big game this season.
And then I started at the beginning of this talking about Jerome Tang leaving, timing up with the defensive metrics dropping. How much? Yeah, I guess this is a tough question to answer. I don't mean I'm not asking for like a number, but like how much is that attributed to Jerome Tang leaving versus personnel? Having Ray J. Dennis, but you had to get like Misi last year, who's a freak, rim runner, NBA one and done guy. So, was it that bad on the perimeter that having Misi back there didn't make more of an impact? And do you expect Scott Drew to make adjustments, or just this having a guy like VJ can help? Get the defense back to a top 25, top 30 range?
Yes, the perimeter defense was absolutely awful last season. Christian, I would agree with you there. I think what I really glean from NBA draft analysis sometimes is you pretty much have to watch like 20 games of a team to really grasp what these prospects are. And I remember reading in The Athletic, not to name the person, but somebody even said like, oh, Jacoby Walter has good fundamentals to be a solid NBA defender. And I just thought, at some level, should we watch the games? Because the reason why the guy got steals is because people would blow past him, and then he'd swipe down at the ball, and every once in a while he'd steal the ball because the guy was ready to lay it in, and every other time the guy would just lay it in. He was a great representative for Baylor, a great shooter, and you look at who else Baylor could have gotten. He did a great job, but he was the worst perimeter defender in the now coming on 9 years of covering Baylor basketball I've seen. And so that was a huge difference in what happened. The Tang versus other issues for why did the defense collapse is an interesting debate. And I think it's one you can make a good case for both sides. On the Tang's departure caused the issues, you could say K-State's been good on defense since Tang left. Tang got Baylor to switch from being a zone team to a combination man-to-man team to a no-middle Mark Adams style team in one offseason. And he then brought that to K-State. They've been really good defensively there, although the offense hasn't quite followed where Jerome would like it to go. And that personality-wise, Jerome Tang was really good at kind of being the bad cop. If you knew the personalities of Scott Drew, John Jacobs, and Alvin Brooks, the other 3 assistants that were on the bench before now, you can have, it feels like 8 assistants. Everybody got a promotion. I hope all my, friends in the industry that were player development guys got raises by now being called assistant coaches. But in the era where those were just the 4 you could list as head coach or assistant coach on the bench, he was the only one who was kind of a guy who could flip from being your best friend 1 second to being not quite your best friend in another second, right? He could be a mean guy at times, a very good human being. But Ish Wainwright once told the story that when he came to Baylor, Tang all the time would just call him Kansas. And Ish Wainwright was from Missouri, and that really got under his skin and bothered him and bothered him and bothered him. But by the end of his career, he went from being a heftier gentleman, as I am right now, to being somebody who lost a ton of weight, stopped eating the Taco Bell, was good enough to play in the NBA, took a brief sojourn into football, and now plays in the NBA. That was the ability Jerome Tang brought to the staff. So I think that's what Baylor's kind of been missing, is somebody who is comfortable being the mean guy. I would ask last season, who's replacing Tang as kind of the bad cop in these situations. They say, well, it's, kind of collective, which I would sometimes read to mean, well, none of you really like having to get after these guys because you're good dudes, just like Tang is. But that's not a switch you can really flip easily. Instead, those were guys who could really grind and tell you, this is why this play works, this is why this play doesn't. Here's where we need to be shooting, right? They were analytics masters, those kinds of things. But that's what they really miss with Tang. Hopefully, with some of the new staff additions, they make up for that part, because they're obviously losing a lot with John Jacobs' skill in analytics, and with Alvin Brooks' skills in player management, and also in analytics as well.
Awesome story. Nick, you got any final questions?
No questions. I just think this is another Baylor team you can pencil in the top 10 offensively, and if the defense is better than it has been the past 2 seasons, then this is a Baylor team that can get out of the round of 32 and make another run at the title, in my opinion.
Let me ask you this, Kendall. With VJ, you mentioned Dwayne Wade, but how do you expect his scoring to mainly come? Is he going to be a guy taking 5-6 threes a game? Is he a guy that's going to be, when you have guys like Roach, Nunn, and Love, who we know can put the ball on the floor at this level and make things happen? Like, do you expect him to be a guy that is, getting a lot in transition versus, like, what is his bag with his handle as a playmaker? Tell us more just about how you see VJ scoring the basketball this year.
Sure. So, Christian, I expect that he's going to score a lot off the bounce. I think he'll probably take 3 threes a game. I expect he'll be a 33, 35% range. So he won't be a Jared Butler of the world in terms of shooting on the perimeter, but he'll be very good at getting to the hoop. And I think his cutting ability will be among the best Baylor's had, along with Keontae George, who was an elite cutter. That'll probably be when we look at the draft videos of Jonathan Gavani, or puts those out again for ESPN. That'll be one of the attributes that'll be strengths, will be cutting ability. And then in the NBA, they'll just say, if you let this guy get out in transition, you got a hard foul him. And the NBA will hopefully, for the sake of people that defend him in the future, have the take rule, so he's not getting beat up all the time, because you got to just pound him in transition. Otherwise, he's going to take flight and end your dreams.
And then leadership is another thing I want to ask you about. You've got guys like Roach and Omier, proven winners, Final Four players, coming over from the ACC in their 5th year. Then you got a guy like Langston Love, who's been there for a while, who has kind of taken that role for this team.
I think that's to be determined by when the season comes about. I think ultimately Jeremy Roach and Omier will both be the leaders, which is a good point to bring up, that, it is different when they're first time on campus. Obviously, Omier's success at Miami, Roach at Duke, the ACC stars, but I think they will be the voices people look to, since I think Roach will have the ball in his hand a lot. And I think Omier, with his experience playing in the Final Four, as you mentioned, Christian, that will be something that guys can look to. And I think at some level, it is tough to follow a freshman as your leader, as good as VJ Edgecombe is, because he's just going to be here for a year. He's not going to play college basketball for more than a season, versus these other guys that have been through the grind and know what it's like to, hey, how do you balance helping win a team, but in your ear saying, if you could just score 4 more points a game, you might start appearing on some mock draft boards. That's what I think leadership is more imperative about in the NIL era. How to tell guys, look, winning will help you get on those draft boards more than taking a couple more shots, versus VJ Edgecombe would kind of have the problem of saying, well, if you could just be as fast as me and as strong as me, maybe things would work out your way. I don't think you would tell guys that, but that's kind of what I think you'd feel like if VJ told you what to do, versus if Jeremy could tell you what to do. You could say, well, this guy chose to transfer from Duke to here. He must really believe in this team.
I guess one last thing to just leave with is, as I've made clear on this call, Norchad and Langston are 2 of my favorite players in the country. And another thing about Norchad that is super underrated about him and about this fit with Baylor, which I really think is such a perfect fit because of his offensive rebounding ability, because of his ability to play both the 4 and the 5. And the other one is his ability as a 5-man or a 4-man to hard hedge on the perimeter, to blow up ball screens and be an aggressive, mobile big, because that is just what Scott Drew loves. That's what Flo Tamba's been, or I call him Chimichanga, Chama Chachua, or you know what I mean? Like, having a big that can do that. And then if OG want to, like we've mentioned, if he can develop into a rim protector, that gives you a little bit of the drop coverage aspect. But Jeremy Roach is also another guy that can get up in your shorts and really defend. Which in the connection I'm drawing there is forcing turnovers. Baylor forced the fourth most turnovers the year they won the championship, 22nd the year before that, and 14th the year after that. And that number is up to 77th and 169 in turnover percentage defensively. Baylor wants to, they're not going to be Iowa State or Houston, that level of aggressive in those ball screens, but I still think that's what Baylor wants to do is force turnovers and get a lot of those transition threes. Because when Baylor's making it rain and the guards are breaking you down off the bounce and they're getting offensive rebounds and defending, like that's exactly how Scott Drew wants to play. And I think it's a testament to him that with the weaknesses of the last two teams, they were still a 3 seed in 16th and 15th in KenPom. So if this team's leveled up from that, I think it's a really fun team. And yeah, the Kansas, Houston, Iowa State, just to name a few of the Big 12 teams, the Big 12 is stacked. But Baylor's going to be in that mix. So
it is a basketball conference and it is a basketball school. The haters can try and deny it, but it will never be a football school again. It is the basketball school. The Big 12 is a basketball conference, and anyone that wants to deny it can. But as we know, the SEC and Big Ten are stealing all the bids in the football playoff, but they can try and steal the bids in the NCAA tournament. It hasn't worked out for them. We will wait the day when the Big Ten can win a national championship again. What was the Clinton administration last time they did so? So the sport still runs through the Big East, the Big 12, and the ACC, and I think it will for a while.
Love it. Well, Kendall, you were an awesome guest. You made definitely one of our funniest viewers too, and obviously super insightful about this Baylor roster. So appreciate you for coming on.
Again, thanks, fellas. It's been great.